I never thought that I would be sitting in an empty house at 38 weeks pregnant, surrounded by silence that seemed to deliberately emphasize my silent pain, watching my husband, the man with whom I spent 7 years of my life, carefully packing his suitcase for a trip to Las Vegas, as if he goes to a banal meeting, and does not leave his pregnant wife 2 weeks before the expected birth. The open suitcase lying on our bed, the one where we had fallen asleep more than once, holding hands, whispering promises to each other, which, as it seemed to me now, he had never attached much importance to, reminded me not so much of the upcoming trip as of the breakup that had already occurred, although technically we were together. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I stood in the bedroom doorway, pressing my hand tightly to my round stomach, in which our child was tossing, as if I felt that something was wrong, that something alien and bitter was hovering between us, and I could hardly hold back tears, because I didn't want him, Tommaso, to see how much he deeply hurt me with his carelessness, his indifference, his ability to put his pleasure above family obligations. "You're going to be fine," he said as he walked, not even bothering to turn fully to me, and as he pulled on another shirt, he added with unbearable calmness, "The due date is not earlier than 2 weeks." He looked at me over his shoulder, and in his gaze flashed the same half-smile that once made my heart beat faster, made my knees tremble, and now only a sharp feeling of pain, twisting my stomach, as if I had swallowed a piece of ice. And as if that wasn't enough, he didn't even blink. "Besides, if something happens, you can always drive yourself to the hospital." His words came out with such lightness, with such almost demonstrative carelessness, that they hung between us like a heavy cloud, and I felt our baby kick sharply from the inside, as if protesting, sharing my indignation, my resentment, my loneliness. 7 years of marriage, and that's what it's come to. I stood in this room, once full of laughter, conversations, and our shared dreams, and watched my husband make a choice again, in favor of friends, fun, and a carefree life, which he is not ready to give up even standing on the threshold of fatherhood. What if something goes wrong? I asked, angry at how quiet and uncertain my voice sounded, as if I doubted my right to be heard. "What if nothing goes wrong, Sophia?" He interrupted with irritation, zipping up the suitcase, as if putting the last point in the conversation. "You're being dramatic. As usual. This is my last chance to have fun before the baby arrives and everything changes." Those words hit me harder than any slap in the face. Everything would change, uttered with such desperation, as if our child was the end of his life, the end of freedom, the end of fun, and not the beginning of something great, alive, real, something that should have bound us even more tightly. I watched him walk away without turning around, carrying not only his weekend bag, but also everything that remained of my ideas about love, marriage, and family. The house, our cozy, beloved home, suddenly became an echoing cave, in which unspoken words, unrequited feelings, and deep loneliness lurked in every corner echoed. I sat down on the bed without undressing, pressing my hand to my stomach, as if trying to calm not only the child, but also myself, and for the first time in all these years I looked at Tommaso without pink glasses, without hopes, without illusions. All the signs were there, weren't they? His indifference to my worries, his disregard for my words, his way of planning everything in his own way, ignoring my desires and thoughts, his ability to reduce my feelings to a drama that he doesn't have to listen to. I saw it all, but I didn't want to admit it. Love blinds, hope deceives, and habit dulls pain. I convinced myself that it was just his character, that he would change when he saw our child, that something fatherly, real, and deep would awaken in him. But now, when I felt how life in me was becoming more active, more and more pronounced, his absence, not physically, but mentally, became an unbearable burden for me. My phone vibrated next to me, and on the screen was a message from Francesca, my older sister, who was always so attentive and empathetic. "Everything is fine." Just 2 words, and something cracked inside me. Everything is fine. If only. That night, lying alone in an oversized bed where we had once been cramped from hugging, I felt the baby pushing, insistently and strongly. I put both hands on my stomach, feeling strangely confident at the touch, and whispered, barely audibly, barely parting my lips. We deserve better, baby. We both deserve it. I didn't know then how important these words would become to me, my mantra, my salvation, my armor, and my source of strength when the hardest part came. But for now, I had to get through this weekend. The phone lit up again, a notification from social networks. Tommaso, at the airport, with friends, smiling, hugging, raising plastic glasses with beer, no shadow of concern on his face, not the slightest concern about what is happening at home. I turned the phone face down, pushing away the pain that wanted to burst out, and closed my eyes, trying not to notice the increasing pressure in my lower back, which was becoming more noticeable by the hour. And it was only when I felt the first real contraction, not that fleeting heaviness in my lower back that I had mistaken for fatigue all this time, not those soft, almost imperceptible tingles that came and went, leaving only a shadow of anxiety, but a real, deep, breathtaking wave of pain, that I realized that this weekend it's not going to go the way Tommaso so confidently predicted, throwing me a dry towel and closing the door behind him with the ease of a man who doesn't have the slightest reason to worry, confident that his world will stay in place while he's having fun. The contractions began like distant thunder, as if a storm was approaching somewhere on the horizon, slowly but inexorably, and I, first holding my breath, then listening to my body, noticed that they were coming more often, not allowing me to ignore what was happening. By midnight, I could no longer deny that the birth had begun, and everything I had been so afraid of, being alone at that moment, had become a reality. I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in the dim bathroom. The floor was cold on my bare feet, but I didn't even think about going back to the bedroom. I launched the contractions tracking app on my phone and, almost automatically, as we were taught in the courses that Tommaso and I attended together, although he was looking more and more at the phone than at the teacher, I noticed the intervals, 20 minutes, 15, 12. The regularity increased, like the pain. It was no longer just as a harbinger. She was becoming the main force of the night. I tried to call Tommaso, once, twice, then 3 more times. Each call was sent to voicemail. I left a message. My voice was shaking, but I tried to speak clearly without panicking. I'm giving birth. Please call me back. But even at the moment when these words left my lips, I felt how empty they were in the context of what was happening. What could the voice on the answering machine change when you start to give birth to a new life, and there is no one next to you who was supposed to hold your hand? Francesca answered the phone almost immediately. Her voice, as always, was full of energy, confidence, and sisterly love. Sophia? What happened? Is the baby coming? I could barely speak. The contraction interrupted my words, stronger than all the previous ones. Tommaso, in Vegas, and I, the words dissolved between breaths. I'll be right there. Don't move. Did you call the doctor? Her voice became even more focused, like a person who has already made a plan of action. Dr. Russo was on duty at the hospital, and she told me not to rush, because the first birth is often delayed, but to be ready. I started packing my hospital bag between contractions, feeling strangely detached, as if I were watching myself from the sidelines. Not once in recent weeks has Tommaso asked me what I was taking with me to the hospital, or offered to help. Every item I put in my bag, the soft nightgown I chose for the postpartum ward, the lavender, scented lotion that helped me relax, the tiny yellow jumpsuit, the gift from my mother seemed not just an object, but a gesture, a symbol of my willingness to accept this path, to walk it alone if necessary, and to create a space in which my child and I will be warm, safe, and calm, no matter who stays next to me. Francesca arrived half an hour later, her cheeks burning from the cold and haste. She came in like a storm and immediately hugged me, without words, without questions, just squeezed me in her arms, and I felt all that tense lump that lived inside me begin to unwind, turn into tears, into tears. Breathing, a sense of relief. He just left, I sobbed, barely able to pronounce the words that had been stuck in my throat all day. He knew it could happen, and yet. Francesca put her hands on my shoulders, forcing me to look into her eyes, full of determination and rage. You're important. This child is important. Right now, you both need to be strong. We'll deal with Tommaso later. At that moment, my phone lit up again. The notification is a new photo on social media. Tommaso with friends at some club, surrounded by neon lights and cheap smiles. His hand was on the waist of a blonde I didn't recognize. Photo caption: Baby from Vegas. The best weekend ever. I stared at the image in disbelief, and then a new contraction hit me, so powerful that I could barely breathe, and I bent over, instinctively hugging my stomach with both hands. Francesca wordlessly took the phone from my hand and turned it off, firmly and gently. "We'll do it our way," she said, holding my gaze, helping me breathe as she'd been taught. "You don't need his negativity right now." The trip to the hospital seemed almost surreal. It was a deep, cold hour of the night, and the streets of the city were empty, as if the world had held its breath with me. The streetlights cast long shadows that swept across the asphalt like illusions disappearing in the rearview mirror. Every fight was like a tide, sudden, crashing, capturing all my attention. Francesca drove with one hand and held my palm with the other, giving me the feeling of an anchor, a connecting link, a support, without which I might have been lost in this torrent of pain, anxiety, and loneliness. At the hospital, the staff was already waiting for us, as if they knew in advance that this night would be the beginning of something important, and a nurse named Chiara, a woman with soft eyes and a warm smile, politely but confidently took control of the situation, helping me get into a wheelchair, and at that moment her kindness was so it was unexpected and deep that my eyes, already full of fatigue and pain, filled with tears again, not from fear, not from pain, but from that inexpressible feeling when someone unknown suddenly becomes your support. "The first child? What is it?" she asked softly, and I nodded and added with difficulty that my husband had left, and when our eyes crossed, there was more understanding in this brief contact than in all the recent conversations with Tommaso. Chiara's eyes met Francesca's, and something unspoken but very clear slipped between them, a union of female solidarity, instantly established between two completely different but equally strong women. "Well," Chiara said, her voice warm and firm at the same time, as if she was not only taking on some of my pain, but also promising to guide me through it, "you have a real support team here. Let's get you settled in." The maternity ward they brought me to didn't match at all the images I'd cherished during the months of waiting. It looked less like a cozy nest, as the brochures promised, and more like a snow-white, technically sound monastery, but despite its sterility, there was something soothing and reliable about it. Like the walls of this, they had already seen more than one such night and knew how to cope with any storm. Francesca helped me change into a nightgown, the one I had chosen with such trepidation, imagining how I would hold our child in it, while Chiara deftly adjusted the monitors, and soon the room was filled with a new sound, the dull, rhythmic beating of my child's heart, strong, confident, as if I already knew that his mom was going through an important ordeal right now, and he was there for me, supporting me from the inside out. "Your baby feels great," Chiara assured, looking at the monitor screen. "You already have 5 centimeters of disclosure. You've done the most difficult part of the house, and you've done it superbly." These words echoed in my head, covering me with a new realization. I was not alone, despite everything, despite the empty side of the bed, the silence of the phone, the photos that still lived in the memory of the screen. I had Francesca, I had my doctor, I had this friendly nurse, I had myself, like I didn't know myself before, steady, collected, incredibly strong. And I had my child, a little man who, even before I was born, taught me self-control, courage, patience and, most importantly, unconditional love. The night dragged on, as if holding back the morning, giving me time to go through every struggle, through every doubt, through every inhale and exhale. I thought less and less about where Tommaso was now, and more about what our future would be like. Not what I had planned, not what we had painted together, but perhaps more real and true. Each fight not only brought me closer to meeting my child, but at the same time brought me to the truth, which was slowly but persistently taking shape in me. I am no longer the woman who forgave indifference. I will no longer wait for approval. I am moving forward, and I am not alone. When the sky began to warm on the horizon, and the first morning rays penetrated the window of the ward, Dr. Russo appeared again, focused, restrained, and yet I felt something almost maternal in her presence. "You're almost there, Sophia," she said, smiling. "Your baby is coming soon." I squeezed Francesca's hand, and this touch became a bridge between yesterday's me and the one who was born with this morning. Outside the window, the sky had changed its blackness to a thick, saturated blue, in which light was beginning to appear. "Pink nature," I whispered to myself, for some reason remembering this phrase from some long ago conversation. Pink nature, the one that wakes up every time the longest night ends. My phone was left in my bag, turned off, forgotten, and somewhere out there, in faraway Vegas, Tommaso was probably just going to bed, not even knowing that I was just starting to wake up not only as a mother, but also as a woman who can stand up for herself. They say childbirth changes a woman forever, but no one says that sometimes this change begins even before the baby is born, in those very hours when you're hovering somewhere between who you were and who you are just about to become. When Dr. Russo announced that the cervix was fully dilated and it was time to push, her voice cut through the haze of fatigue that had accumulated overnight, like a spotlight cutting through a fog. "It's time, Sophia. It's time to meet your child." The sun's rays were already streaming freely through the window, painting the delivery room in a soft, almost golden glow, and I felt my fears suddenly give way to excitement, as if everything that had happened before had led to this moment. I had been in labor for almost 12 hours, and every effort, every wave of pain brought me closer not only to the life I was carrying, but also to myself, the real one. Francesca was there all the time, her hands, her voice, her breathing, all this was an anchor in a world that was blurring with pain. And when I whispered, "I can't. I'm not strong enough," Francesca leaned over to me, looking straight into my eyes, and squeezed my hand with such force, as if she were giving me all her courage. "Look at you. You've already proved how strong you are. You have this beauty. Don't give up." The next fight came like a tide, relentless, cumbersome, and with it came that primal desire that was talked about in the courses, the desire to push, give birth, free. I gathered myself, directing not only physical effort, but also every drop of pain, disappointment, despair, and determination that had accumulated in me all these months, and through the pressure, through the fire, through the tears, I heard Dr. Russo's voice. "That's it, Sophia, your baby is coming." My thoughts flashed to Tommaso, as if out of a habit that was destined to disappear soon, and I imagined how he must be waking up in his hotel room now, lifting his head heavily from the pillow, perhaps feeling the weight of the hangover inherent in the morning hours after a sleepless night full of alcohol, laughter, and random hugs, completely unaware that at this very moment his child, our daughter, is about to be born. I stopped trying to call him a few hours ago, exhaling into the void of trying to be heard, after Francesca, with regret and quiet indignation, showed me his latest post on social networks, a selfie with a blurred, lost look and a caption that causes excitement from meaninglessness. "What's happening in Vegas?" As if everything happening here, in this room, at this moment, was something secondary, something that could be ignored for the sake of fun. But I didn't have time to think about him. The fight rolled over again like a cruel wave, and I gritted my teeth and concentrated on breathing, on the steady, rhythmic squeak of the fetal monitor, as if this sound was an anchor in reality, and Francesca's voice, calm, confident, counted with me, holding me on the surface, when the whole body screamed about the limit. The pressure grew, engulfing me completely, and Dr. Russo, restrained but encouraging, said quietly and clearly, "The head is crowned." Her words were like a lightning bolt into the fog. The moment of truth had come, and I, summoning the last of my strength, which I hadn't even suspected existed, pressed down, letting my body speak for my mind, tearing out everything that had been accumulating, fear, pain, fatigue, despair, and suddenly the pressure disappeared like a burst tension, and a scream filled the room, thin, strong, indignant, alive. "It's a girl!" Dr. Russo exclaimed, and at the same moment my daughter was placed on my chest, her warm body merged with my skin, and in this touch the whole world narrowed to a single point, her presence. Her fingers, tiny and perfect, convulsively clenched, her eyes, still not accustomed to the light, squinted, and she looked at me, unconsciously, but with the same ferocious determination that I felt in myself that night. She had a shock of dark hair, my nose, and maybe Tommaso's chin, but when I looked at her face, I saw not only a reflection of us, but something new, independent, already asserting itself with its voice, its existence. "Hi, baby," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks, mixing with drops of sweat. "I'm your mom." Francesca, who was standing next to her, was crying too. Her phone, forgotten in her hand, went off when she leaned closer to look at her niece. "She's beautiful, Sophia," she said, her voice full of awe, "absolutely beautiful." The next hour passed in a strange haze, a mixture of medical fuss and sacred peace, as if everything was moving too fast and unbearably slow at the same time. My daughter, whom I named Mimi, the name I dreamed of even before I knew who I was expecting, was carefully weighed, measured, and evaluated. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, perfect health, perfect start. I was helped to hold Mimi to my chest, and that moment, when she first, hesitantly but resolutely, began to search and find, was like the awakening of a new universe where there was no place for doubt or loneliness. My phone has been silent all this time, cut off from the past, as if even he realized that it was not his turn to be heard. Only when Mimi, lulled by my breathing and the rhythm of my heart, fell asleep peacefully in the cradle next to my bed, and Francesca went out to call our parents and tell them about the miracle, as if in a trance, reached for the phone and turned it on. Messages flooded in like a river that had burst a dam, missed calls from friends, congratulations from colleagues sent through Francesca, random, touching, encouraging. And among them is one message from Tommaso, sent just half an hour ago. The flight was delayed. Vegas was crazy. He should be home tonight, not this afternoon. I hope everything is still good there. I stared at the screen, feeling no anger, not even bitterness, just a strange, deep sense of calm, as if these few lines had become the final point in a long, exhausting story. These words are the whole essence of Tommaso, his frivolity, his lack of instinct to protect and be close, his inability to feel important without seeing through his eyes. That was all I needed to know about him, about his priorities, about our illusory life together, which should no longer be. Mimi stirred in her cradle, making that soft, aching sound of a newborn that immediately tears the heart apart. I bent down and stroked her cheek. Her skin was like a petal, and her breath was the light breeze of a spring morning. I looked at her and felt the promise growing stronger in me, to her and to myself, that we deserved better. "We deserve better," I whispered, repeating the very words I had said the day before, although now they sounded different, with a new force, with a conviction that had not been there before, like a mantra turned into an oath, like a quiet revolution that finally found a voice. It was a declaration of independence, not bright, not threatening, but confident and absolute. I picked up my phone and started texting Francesca, feeling each character bring me closer to the next step, to a decision that has been brewing in me for a long time. "When you get back, we need to talk. I know what I need to do." I pressed send, and at the same moment Mimi opened her eyes. Her gaze was surprisingly clear, focused, as if she already understood that I was there, and that was all she needed. And at that moment, I felt stronger than ever in my life, because I knew it wasn't going to be easy ahead, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I brought a new life into this world alone. Without any guarantees and support, without a reliable shoulder by my side, without words of comfort from someone who, according to all the laws of love and responsibility, should have been the first to hear our daughter's cry, I coped with this sacred, immensely difficult, but wonderful moment, and therefore I knew that I could build a new life for us, one in which there will be only room for care, dignity, and genuine love, in which my daughter will grow up knowing that her mother is strong, respected, and does not back down from anything. The sun was high in the sky, filling the delivery room with a soft, golden light, as if blessing everything that had happened, as if the sky itself had decided to reward us with warmth for the cold night that we had endured without it. In a few hours, Tommaso will land in Las Vegas, get off the plane, perhaps dizzy from lack of sleep and yesterday's alcohol, and check his messages, among which he will not find any from me, and only then, perhaps, something will tremble in him, but by that time the changes have already begun. They will begin, and there will be no turning back, because while he was gambling, drinking, and laughing in Vegas, I was winning something much more valuable: clarity, courage, and unshakable confidence that my daughter deserves a world where she sees before her a woman who does not bend under the weight of other people's decisions. I picked up my phone for the last time and opened the banking application, a familiar, mechanical gesture that hid the need to know the truth to the end. On our joint account with Tommaso, several large withdrawals were recorded, followed by laconic but meaningful signatures: casino, bar, resort. I took a deep breath, not allowing myself to fall into the usual melancholy or rage. Instead, I felt my resolve strengthen inside me. I dialed the number of our family lawyer, which was in my contacts as a reminder that even in the most stable-looking unions, it is important to have a way out. I always told myself that this was just in case, and now this case has come. The next 24 hours flew by in a whirlwind: baby hugs, soft breathing on my neck, visits from nurses and doctors, gentle touches and instructions, moments when Mimi, a tiny miracle, searched for breasts and found them, instinctively, with amazing determination. I hadn't told Tommaso about Mimi's birth, and despite the fact that such a decision would once have seemed radical to me, now it felt almost natural, like a quiet act of self-defense, like a gesture freeing me from illusions. Every time my finger hovered over his name in the contacts, I remembered not my offense, but the scene where he stood in front of the mirror and said with a grin, "You can drag yourself to the hospital, if anything," and I realized that it wasn't anger that was holding me back, but the realization that I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Mrs. Mancini, an elderly nurse whom I had not seen before, entered the room, holding a tablet in her hands, and, bending slightly, said with polite caution, "Your husband just called the front desk. He's on his way." My pulse jumped, but my voice remained calm. "Thank you," I said, meeting Francesca's gaze, and she understood everything without words. She went to the cradle, carefully picked up Mimi and, settling into a chair by the window, began to rock her, as if there had always been this invisible connection between them. Tommaso burst into the room a few minutes later, still with his travel bag on his shoulder, his face flushed, his hair disheveled, and the smell of road dust and haste. He froze when he saw Mimi in Francesca's arms, and his mouth opened as if he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. "What, when?" he stuttered, looking from me to the child. "Yesterday morning," I said quietly, not looking away, "about 6 hours after you posted that group photo from the club." He took a step forward, reached for Mimi, but Francesca barely noticeably turned away, continuing to rock our sleeping daughter, and in this simple movement it said more than words can express: "You can't just walk in, stretch out your arms and play a role that you don't deserve." "Why didn't you call me?" he demanded, and there was not so much resentment in his voice as bewilderment, as if I had violated an unspoken contract. "I called you 3 times, Tommaso, when I went into labor. Then I wrote." "Then she called again," I replied, still softly, remembering that a newborn was sleeping in the room. "You were too busy with your best days off to check your phone." He looked away, and embarrassment flashed across his face, but disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "You knew this was my last chance to have fun. Before the baby was born, you could have waited." "Wait?" Francesca interrupted, her voice sharp as glass hitting marble. "Do you think childbirth is a planned dentist appointment?" Tommaso ran a hand through his hair, sighed, disappointment clearly squeezing his chest. "That's not what I meant. This was supposed to be our moment, together, and you turned it into some kind of ambush." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear or pain in my gaze, only the pure, deep calm that comes when you know exactly who you are and what you want. "No, Tommaso," I said evenly, "you turned it into this, the moment you decided that a weekend of partying was more important than being with your wife and daughter." "But I'm here," he objected, opening his arms, as if this gesture could erase everything that had happened. "I came as soon as I found out." "Because the receptionist called to tell you that your wife had given birth," I corrected, "not because you were worried enough to check on me yourself." A noise from the hallway made us all turn around, and my parents appeared in the doorway, their figures silhouetted against the soft light from the hallway, and the second I saw my mother's face, tense, agitated, but illuminated by that special, deep joy that can only arise at the sight of her first grandchild, I realized how much I needed them both, how much I needed them right now to be there to witness this new chapter. My mother's face, despite her smile, was marked by restrained anger, which she did not even try to hide, anger caused by the sight of Tommaso and the whole situation in which her daughter found herself through no fault of her own. My father, as always, remained more restrained outwardly. His expression was difficult to read, but his hands, tightly clasped at his sides, betrayed tension, a restrained storm of emotions. "Mom, Dad," I said softly, and there was gratitude and uncertainty in my voice, and maybe a little regret that this was how they had to get to know my granddaughter. "Get acquainted. This is Mimi." My mother didn't say a word, didn't even glance in Tommaso's direction, as if he were just an inconspicuous shadow against the background of this event, and walked past, heading straight for Francesca, who was still holding the baby in her arms. She bent down, looked at Mimi with the tenderness peculiar only to a grandmother, and kissed her on the forehead, as if blessing her. My father remained standing at the door, and his gaze, heavy and direct, was fixed directly on Tommaso. He shuddered, as if it was only at that moment that he realized how lonely he had become in this room full of people, when no one was going to come to his aid, smooth out the situation, give excuses, let him play the role of a decent man again. "Save her," his father said softly, looking straight into Tommaso's eyes. "I think you've said enough." Tommaso slowly turned his gaze to me, and there was no longer the same self-confidence in him, only confusion remained. He looked around the room as if looking for at least one ally, but found none. "Sophia," he began in the same tone that I knew painfully well, coaxing, soft, forced. "I know, I screwed up. But we can fix it. We're a family now." I looked at Mimi, who was now sleeping in my mother's arms, her face calm, her breathing even, like someone who still doesn't know how difficult it can be in this world. Then I looked back at Tommaso. "You're right about one thing," I said flatly, without malice, but with firmness. "We are a family. Mimi and me. And we deserve better than a person who sees us as an inconvenience." "What are you saying?" His voice became harsh, as if he had finally realized that the conversation was not going according to the usual script. I reached for the envelope that was on my bedside table, the one that had been delivered from my lawyer this morning when I knew he was coming. "I'm saying," I said, feeling my confidence grow stronger with every word, "that when I get out of this hospital, I'm not going home with you." Inside the envelope were documents, a separation agreement, a temporary custody agreement for Mimi, and a detailed financial statement that, among other things, listed his expenses in Vegas, drawn up and classified by a lawyer with legal meticulousness. Tommaso paled as his gaze scanned the pages. "You can't do that," he muttered. "You can't just do that." "Actually, I can," I interrupted, and my voice was so firm that even I barely recognized it myself. "And I've already done it. You can either sign them now, or we'll resolve it through lawyers. Anyway, it's happening." He looked around the room again, as if hoping that someone would take his side, say that I was overreacting, that everything could be forgiven, but no one moved. My father entered the room and closed the door behind him with a soft but final click that sent shivers down my spine, as if by doing so he had set a point that no one else could erase. Mimi, as if sensing the tension, stirred, her face wrinkled, and she let out her first loud, displeased cry. Tommaso took a step back from the sound, as if he instinctively recoiled, and without thinking, I held out my hands, and my mother carefully handed her daughter to me. That simple gesture, how we both knew what to do without words, and Tommaso's reaction, his detachment, his unwillingness to hold even his own child, said more than anything he could have said. I took one last look at him. "You can be a part of her life, Tommaso. But you'll have to earn it. And it starts with respect for me, as her mother." He stood for a long time, the papers in his hands slightly crumpled, his gaze darted between the faces in the room, and finally, He put the documents at the foot of my bed. "I'll ask my lawyer to look through them," he said dryly, almost mechanically, then turned around and left without saying another word. The door closed softly behind him, but for me it was final. I let out a long, deep breath that I didn't even realize I was taking, and it had everything in it: fatigue, liberation, and the beginning of a new life. Mimi settled on my chest, her tiny hand clutching the hem of my hospital gown, as if she, too, felt that everything was just beginning. Mom was sitting on one side of the bed, Dad on the other. Their presence was warm, real, not intrusive, but reliable. Francesca stood at the door like a guard, ready to protect us from everything. "You did well, dear," my father said softly, putting his hand on mine. "You did very well." I looked at my daughter, and tears ran down my cheeks, but they were not tears of pain or fear, but tears of relief and strength. The difficult part wasn't over yet, I knew that, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be and doing exactly what I needed to do. Outside, the midday sun cast long shadows on the floor of the hospital room, tracing bizarre patterns on the sterile white linoleum, as if nature itself wanted to witness how one stage of life ends and another begins. Another day was coming to an end, but for Mimi and me, everything was just beginning, because no dawn was as significant as the one that was coming inside us, in that invisible universe that I now shared with my daughter, which no one else knew how to keep, love, appreciate it. The first weeks of motherhood were like a hazy awakening after a long, restless sleep. They flowed in the rhythm of midnight feedings, hasty diaper changes, endless walks around the room, during which, with Mimi at my chest, I learned to breathe in a new way, learned to hear this fragile, weightless world in which everything revolved around her now. But these weeks were also my first real breath of independence, not the kind that is declared in self-development lectures, but genuine, mature, and a little scary, because for the first time I realized how much strength I can have when I no longer wait, do not ask, do not justify, but just live by doing a choice based not on fear, but on love. Francesca, without asking any questions, with the determination that has always been her hallmark, insisted that Mimi and I stay with her until I get back on my feet, and her spare bedroom, which until recently had an exercise bike and boxes of old books, turned into our refuge, our first a real home, a sanctuary where I was allowed to be vulnerable, confused, but strong at the same time, because my sister was there, ready to lend a shoulder, and because I knew this was just the beginning. The room wasn't huge, but it had enough space for a cot, a changing table, and the most necessary things that I packed the very day Tommaso returned from work and found me almost ready to leave. He stood on the threshold of our, now his, bedroom, perplexedly looking around at the empty closet and my open suitcase, into which I was packing the last things. "You didn't take much," he said, and there was more surprise than reproach in his voice. I zipped up my bag without taking my eyes off Mimi's sleep in the carrier. "I only took what was mine," I replied calmly. He stopped talking, but I could feel the tension swirling in the air, as if even the walls of the room felt that this wasn't just a move, it was the end. Everything we bought for Mimi, a crib, a chest of drawers, even a night light in the shape of a cloud, remained in her room. We agreed that we would make a schedule as soon as he signs the documents. His lawyer had been reviewing the separation agreement for a week now, sending suggestions and edits, most of which were accepted because I wasn't looking for war. I was looking for peace, for clarity, for the opportunity to move on without turning around. And now, 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the realtor's office, in a spacious, bright room with tall windows that smelled of coffee and fresh printouts, and Mimi was sleeping quietly on my chest in a thin fleece robe, her warm breath barely touching my skin, reminding me of what I was doing all this for. Francesca, without betraying herself, scrolled through the photos of the apartments on the agent's computer with a concentrated look, checking every detail with what I had told her in recent weeks: security, light, school, neighborhood, everything had to be perfect. "It's within your budget," said Julia, our realtor, pointing to the photo on the screen. 1-bedroom apartment, ground floor, no stairs, comfortable with a wheelchair. There is a park nearby. And yes, this is the same school district that you mentioned. I was surprised at myself when I realized that I was already thinking about school districts, about the future, so far away and at the same time so real, and realized that every decision I make now is not just mine. It was the beginning of a life built with Mimi in mind, and every brick was laid in her honor. I'd like to see her, I said, adjusting the blanket on my daughter, who stirred slightly. Julia nodded and made an appointment to watch it a few minutes later. Francesca scrolled through the photos, frowning. She looks good, Sophia. Lots of natural light. And the kitchen is better than the one we saw last week. The apartment turned out to be even better than I expected. The high ceilings gave the modest square meters a sense of spaciousness, and the small second bedroom had a window with a niche where I was already mentally arranging pillows and children's books, imagining how Mimi would one day settle down there with her favorite story. The kitchen turned into a dining area, and in the living room there were built-in bookshelves, on which I had already seen fictional worlds, to which we would return together every night before going to bed. The owner is willing to take a 2-year lease, Julia said, leading us down the hall, and yes, they allow us to repaint the walls. Just return them to a neutral color when checking out. I stopped in the bedroom that could become Mimi's room, looked at the light pouring through the window, and imagined soft yellow and green shades on the walls, the colors of spring, beginning, hope. I'll take it, I said. I was surprised at how confident my words sounded. Later that evening, as Francesca and I were sitting in her living room with cups of tea, Mimi was sleeping in her portable cradle next to me, and the spring rain was starting to drizzle outside. My phone vibrated. Message from Tommaso. I signed the papers today. The lawyer will give them to you tomorrow. Can we talk about visits? I silently handed the screen to Francesca. She squeezed my hand without saying a word. You'll do fine, she said softly. I nodded, picked up my phone, and dialed back. Thank you. Yes, we can discuss visits. I'm moving to a new place next week. I clicked send, and in this simple action there was everything: a border, a line, a beginning. We can meet with an intermediary to make a schedule. His answer came quickly, and although I expected indignation, ultimatums, or, on the contrary, feigned submission, he limited himself to a dry clarification: a new place. I took a deep breath before I started typing the answer, realizing how much there was in this phrase: interest, hidden distrust, an attempt to regain control. I'll share the address as soon as everything is finalized, I wrote, choosing each word with care, like a surgeon choosing an instrument before surgery. We can arrange supervised visits at my parents' house. I knew that this would not be taken lightly by him, but now my decisions were determined not by his convenience, but by the safety and well-being of our daughter. There was a long pause, and there was tension in it, even through the screen, even through the thousands of unspoken words that had accumulated during all that time. And finally, he answered, under surveillance? I'm her father, Sophia. You can't keep her away from me. I didn't allow myself to get angry. I didn't let this emotion get the better of me. Too much had already been destroyed by anger. Too much was lost in its shadow. I won't keep her from you, I wrote calmly. I'm setting boundaries. We can renegotiate the agreement in a few months, depending on how things go. There was no response. I looked at the screen for another minute, and then put the phone on the bedside table, got up and went to the nursery. Mimi began to move, as if exactly according to the schedule that her tiny but strong life had already begun to dictate. When I picked her up, she opened her eyes and looked at me with that gaze full of universal wisdom that took me by surprise every time, as if she understood more than she could, as if she knew how much this moment meant to both of us. Tomorrow is a big day, baby, I whispered, settling into the rocking chair Francesca had given us and hugging Mimi like the most precious thing I have, because that's how it was. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of preparation and chores, and there was more order in this fuss than in any routine of the past, because every step, every action was aimed at building a new life. My parents didn't hesitate to help with the mortgage on the apartment. When I timidly mentioned that I could take care of the expenses, my father just waved his hand and said in his firm, unquestioning voice, Consider this an investment in our granddaughter's future. Francesca took the day off to help with the moving and painting. We chose a soft cream shade for the living room, so that it would always be light and calm, and the same delicate green that I had imagined for Mimi's room for so long, the color of hope, freshness, and new life. Every brush stroke, every unpacked box, every detail placed in its place filled the space with meaning, enlivened the walls, breathed our story into them, and with every passing hour this house became more and more ours, and not just another rented apartment. The first night in the new apartment was both frightening and surprisingly liberating. After Francesca, having made sure that everything was arranged, left, and Mimi, having eaten and changed clothes, calmly fell asleep in her crib, donated by my parents, I was left alone. I stood in the living room, surrounded by new walls, silence, books, and the soft light of the bedside lamp, and just breathed, allowing myself to truly feel this new space for the first time. It was smaller than the house I shared with Tommaso, but it seemed bigger, perhaps because there was no tension in it, there was no shadow of another person defining the atmosphere, there was no need to guess the mood, walk on tiptoe, restrain yourself. It was my house, and its walls did not hear quarrels, but laughter, not irritation, but lullabies. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, a message from Tommaso. My lawyer said that supervised visits are not necessary. I want to see my daughter. I walked over slowly, glanced at the screen, then at the monitor next to it, where Mimi was peacefully snoring. I typed in, "We can discuss this with the mediator on Tuesday. I've already made an appointment." Then I turned off my phone without waiting for an answer, and went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat on a used but cozy sofa given by Francesca, and opened the parenting book, the one she put in my bag with the words, "You already know a lot. But sometimes it's useful to see it written." Through the window, I could see the park Julia was talking about. Its trees loomed against the evening sky, their outlines softly lost in the twilight. In this silence, broken only by my daughter's calm breathing coming through the baby monitor, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Not the peace that comes from avoiding conflict or tacit agreement, not the fragile calm before the storm, but a genuine, lasting peace that grows from within, from the realization that I am exactly where I need to be, and doing exactly what I need to do. A soft cry came from Mimi's room, not crying, not hysteria, but just a sound that said, "I'm here, Mom, I'm ready for the next feeding." I got up, passing by the window, and involuntarily caught my reflection in the glass. The woman who looked at me from the depths of that mirrored silhouette was tired, yes. Her eyes were framed by dark circles, her shoulders were a little hunched from the weight of days and nights without sleep, but there was a strength in her gaze that had not been there before, a confidence that the Sophia who stood in the door did not know. In the bedroom doorway, watching her husband put his shirts in a suitcase, leaving for Las Vegas. That Sophia was afraid of loneliness, believed that it was better to be with someone than alone. This one knew that being alone when you're at peace with yourself is not scary, it's freedom. This is the beginning. The mediation office was located in a modern building in the city center, and as I walked through its glass doors, I immediately felt a strange mixture of comfort and formality, as if they were carefully trying to create an atmosphere that could both calm and set up a constructive conversation. The walls were painted in calm, muted shades of blue and gray, color schemes obviously chosen by psychologists to reduce the tension that almost always accompanies such meetings. I arrived a little ahead of schedule. Mimi, like clockwork, fell asleep in her carrier, and I stood by the mirrored walls of the elevator, watching my reflection, as if trying to rediscover the woman I had become. My choice of outfit was not accidental, a dark blue jacket over a cream blouse, professional, but not cold, restrained, but with a touch of accessibility, as I wanted to be perceived today, not as an angry mother, not as an ex-wife, but as a responsible, reasonable woman who knows what she wants, for she loves her child and is ready to negotiate calmly and with dignity. I squared my shoulders and quietly reminded myself once more, I'm Sophia. And at that moment, a voice came from behind, which I recognized instantly, despite months of silence. Sophia. I turned around and saw Tommaso standing not far from the reception desk, in his best business suit, the one he wore for important meetings with clients, and although he looked collected and well groomed, I immediately noticed fatigue in his face, that fatigue that is not directly related to sleep, but comes from me inside, from a compressed, uncertain heart. "Hi, Tommaso," I said, keeping my tone even and polite, not allowing any emotion to break out ahead of time. His gaze immediately slid to Mimi, and he didn't take a single step, just looked at her, as if for the first time he realized how much she had changed. "She's grown up," he said softly. I adjusted the blanket on the carrier, not stiffly, not ostentatiously, but quite clearly to show that I wasn't ready for him to pick her up yet. It was not a ban, but a boundary. Before the silence could drag on, the mediator, Dr. Patricia Longo, a woman in her 50s with a shrewd but friendly look, invited us into the office. The space she took us to was organized so that there was no sense of confrontation. 2 comfortable armchairs separated by a coffee table, soft light, and no sharp corners. "Before we begin," Dr. Longo said as we settled in, "I want to remind you both that our goal is to build a healthy, sustainable co-parenting relationship that best serves your daughter's interests." These words were followed by 2 hours of unhurried, intense, but productive negotiations. Tommaso, as I expected, insisted on immediate overnight visits, arguing that he had every right to spend more time with his daughter. I stood my ground. Let's start with daytime visits under supervision, not because I wanted to punish him, but because it was the right thing to do, for Mimi, for me, for himself. Dr. Longo, with the professional dexterity of a conductor, guided the conversation, smoothed out the sharp corners, and offered reasonable compromises. "How about 3 supervised visits per week to start?" she suggested. 2 hours each, at Sophia's parents' house. After a month, if everything goes well, we can discuss extending the duration and gradually moving to uncontrolled visits. I noticed Tommaso's jaw tighten at the words under surveillance, but he nodded. We discussed the schedule, communication rules, expectations, and agreed to use a special app for parenting. No personal messages, no impulsive calls. At some point, towards the end of the meeting, Tommaso couldn't stand it. "I know how to take care of my daughter." I looked at him and asked softly but firmly, "Do you know her feeding schedule? Do you know when she sleeps the longest? Which side is more convenient for her to feed from? In what positions does she calm down when she has gas?" He didn't answer, and I finished. "I learned all this while you were absent. This is not a punishment, Tommaso. It's a matter of comfort and safety. Her and mine. You don't just need to claim rights, you need to earn trust. Mine and hers." He didn't object, didn't argue. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, as if something in my speech had finally reached him. "What do I need to do?" "What is it?" he asked softly. By the end of the session, we had a clear plan. He attends a class for fathers, specially designed for such cases, strictly adheres to the schedule of visits, agrees that all important decisions are discussed in advance through the application. And, most importantly, he stopped seeking favors or intimacy outside of the agreed context. It would be better for all 3 of them if the boundaries remained clear. When we left the office, he looked at Mimi sleeping in the carrier again. His hand rose for a moment, as if he wanted to touch her cheek, but stopped, as if remembering everything that had been said. "When can I start visiting?" "The first one is scheduled for Saturday," I reminded him, referring to the calendar we had just agreed on. "At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at my parents' place." He nodded, but hesitated for a moment before leaving. "Sophia. I'm sorry. For Vegas. For everything." I looked at him, not just looked at him, but really, really looked at him, for the first time since that day in the hospital, when he stood on the threshold of the ward, confused, with a rumpled travel bag and eyes that sought understanding, but offered nothing in return. The man I once married was still there, in his facial features, in his hand movements, in his intonations, but next to him, like an inseparable shadow, all those red flags that I had turned a blind eye to for years, wrapping them in rational explanations, in compromises, now loomed clearly. In the belief that he will change. "I know you are," I finally said, letting the words sound slow, as if weighing them before letting them go. "But I'm sorry, it's not enough anymore. Mimi deserves action, not an apology." At home, in my apartment with Mimi, I got used to the new rhythm, and gradually, day after day, the routine became familiar, almost cozy. Breastfeeding, changing diapers, quiet conversations with my daughter, as if she could already understand my words. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, looking through job listings. Maternity leave couldn't last forever, and I needed to think ahead about the next step. The savings that I had been scrupulously collecting in a separate account for several years turned out to be a real salvation, a habit that originated after Tommaso's first big binge, when I first realized that shared money was not always safe. But now I wanted stability, a job that would be not only a source of income, but also a reminder that I am not only a mother, but also a professional. A message from Francesca popped up on the phone screen. "How did everything go?" I typed in the answer with one hand, without taking my other hand off Mimi's head, which squeezed my finger in a small fist, better than I expected. Tommaso agreed to supervised visits and parenting courses. The answer from my sister was not long in coming. "I am proud of you, little sister." And in those words, I felt something that I hadn't fully realized yet: pride. Not because we were able to come to an agreement, but for ourselves. For not saving my marriage, not trying to preserve my illusions, but defending my and Mimi's right to respect, stability, and love, real, not declarative. Mimi, having fed, fell asleep on my chest. Her breathing became even and warm, and I continued to sit motionless, peering into her face and wondering how such a tiny creature could be a source of such power. The phone vibrated again, a notification from the co-parenting app. Tommaso had set up a profile. "I have registered for the recommended parenting course. Confirmation added." Small steps. But still, the footsteps. And even though I did not allow myself to build illusions, I saw that if there is a way that Tommaso can return, it begins with such steps. That evening, when I was cooking dinner in my small kitchen, the heat reigned not only in the pot, but also in my heart. I suddenly noticed that I was humming, just casually, humming something simple, forgotten, childish, while Mimi, sitting in an armchair on the counter, watched me with an expression of complete happiness. I was even surprised by the sound of my own voice. When was the last time I was light enough to let myself sing? The aromas of the sauce filled with garlic, tomatoes, and herbs enveloped the apartment, creating the feeling of a real home. I invited Francesca to dinner, a small celebration, not so much of the agreement itself, but of the feeling that I was able to handle what was coming next. "That's right, baby," I said, turning to Mimi, who made a bubbling, joyful sound, as if agreeing with me. "We will succeed." One day after another. The sun was setting, and its rays poured through the kitchen window, flooding our corner with warm golden light. At that moment, I felt something completely change in me. The traces of doubt that I had been clinging to for so long dissolved, giving way to quiet confidence. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but I knew for sure that I was ready. I'm ready for anything. 3 months passed unnoticed. As Mimi grew up, her eyes became more attentive, her movements became coordinated, and her personality became brighter. She had a Tommaso smile, wide, unexpected, mischievous, and although this fact used to hurt me, now I accepted it with ease. Yes, she had his features, but the determination in her gaze, the stubborn pursing of her lips when she didn't like something was from me. The supervised visits with Tommaso went quite smoothly. He was punctual, behaved respectfully, even played with Mimi, and even though she didn't realize who he was yet, he seemed to be beginning to realize who he wanted to be. We had already started discussing the gradual transition to unsupervised visits, and although I remained cautious in the process, it was nice to see how his attitude towards fatherhood was becoming more mature. On one of the usual days, when I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, sipping tea and updating my resume, and Mimi was peacefully dozing in a stroller next to me, a familiar voice reached my ear. "Sophia Mancini?" I looked up and saw Matteo, my former colleague from the marketing firm I worked for before joining Tommaso's company. He was carrying his laptop and a cup of coffee, and a sincere smile shone on his face, in which there was neither surprise nor condemnation, only warm joy from the meeting. He looked exactly as I remembered, kind, attentive eyes, salt and pepper hair, and that sincere, warm smile that always made me feel at ease, even on the most stressful day. Matteo. It's been at least 3 years since we last saw each other, and everything seemed to have changed during that time, but his presence brought me back to the space where I once felt like part of a team, a professional, a person with my own voice. He smiled even wider when he noticed Mimi, and his expression softened, warmed up. "And who is this little girl?" "This is Mimi," I said proudly, straightening the blanket for her. "She's 3 months old." "She's beautiful," he replied softly, looking at her with a kind of almost paternal tenderness. "Do you mind if I join you for a minute?" "Only if you're not too busy." I looked at my laptop screen, when my half-completed resume was more annoying than inspiring. "Actually," I said, "I could take a break. And maybe some tips, if you don't mind." The next hour passed in a leisurely conversation, during which I unexpectedly told myself almost everything, about the pregnancy, about that night in Vegas, about the breakup, about the new life that I began to build with Mimi in my arms. He listened with concern, without a shadow of condemnation, sometimes inserting cautious remarks, sharing his own experience. As a divorced father of 2 teenagers, he understood much more than I expected. "You know," he said, looking thoughtfully into his cup, "we're just looking for someone to head our digital marketing department. We need a person who feels equally well both the creative and the analytical side." My heart skipped a beat. After all, this was my specialty before I left the previous company, passionate about the dream that Tommaso sold me. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. The schedule is flexible. We have a kindergarten right in the building." He pulled a business card out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Think about it. I would really like to see you on the team again." That evening, as I washed Mimi and watched her splashing around in the warm water with interest, my thoughts didn't stop spinning in my head. The job seemed ideal, not only in terms of professional growth, but also because it would be a chance to build a career on your own terms. But it would also mean changes, in the schedule, in the routine, in our days with Mimi. And, of course, this will require a review of the visiting schedule. As if to confirm my thoughts, the phone vibrated, a notification from the co-parenting app. "Can we reschedule the visit on Saturday at 4 p.m.? The meeting with the client was delayed," Tommaso wrote. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Longo's advice about the need for flexibility, but not at the expense of my own boundaries. "The agreement is for 2 p.m. Mimi needs consistency. Please schedule meetings in such a way that you do not change the agreed time." The answer came almost immediately. "This is an important client." "Sophia, don't be complicated." "I'm not being difficult. I'm raising a child. 2 p.m. or another day." After a short pause, he wrote, "Good. I'll make it work." And it was a kind of progress, because before I would have changed my whole day to adjust. Now I knew how important it was to stand my ground. The next morning, after leaving Mimi with my parents, I went to an interview. The office had changed. It had become more spacious and modern, but the same energy was in the air, the energy of creativity, collaboration, and moving forward. My excitement dissipated as soon as I entered the meeting room, and already during the presentation I realized that I was still in my element. "The position is yours, if that's what you want," Matteo said after the presentation. "We can be flexible with the start date so that you have time to organize everything." I didn't hesitate. "I agree." As I drove home, the wind blew my hair through the open window, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I had a plan, a goal, a direction again. When I picked Mimi up from Mom and told her the news, she hugged us both. "I'm so proud of you, honey," she said, wiping away her tears. "You've come so far." That evening, When Mimi fell asleep, I went out on the balcony with a glass of wine, wrapped myself in a blanket and looked at the stars. The air was fresh, the evening was calm, and inside I had the feeling that I was finally walking at my own pace, on my own road. The phone vibrated again, a message from Francesca. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow? I want you to meet someone." I smiled. I knew who she wanted me to meet. She had been hinting for weeks about her new colleague, a single father who was smart, kind, with an amazing sense of humor and hands that could calm any baby. "I'm not ready," I replied, but added, "Ask me again in a few months." The answer came instantly. "I'm proud that you know what you want." And I really knew. For the first time in my adult life, I clearly understood what I needed, what I wanted, what I deserved. The future no longer scared me. It spread out before me not as a threat or a burden, but as a clean canvas that was waiting for my touch, my colors, my story. And I was ready to draw. Mimi made a small, barely perceptible sound in her sleep, and without waiting for the anxiety to grow inside me, I got up from my seat, went into her room, stood by the crib and, holding my breath, watched her tiny chest rise and fall evenly in the soft, amber light of the nightlight, coloring everything in warm, gentle shades. I looked into her face, into her plump cheeks, thin eyelashes, into that amazing baby's piece, and I saw her father and myself there again, but even more, something separate, new, belonging to none of us, her own essence, an emerging personality that someday will be with confidence. Look in the mirror and know who she is. Dream big, baby, I whispered, carefully adjusting the blanket. Your mom will always be there. Returning to the balcony, I opened my laptop and finally typed in the first lines of what I had been thinking about for weeks, a blog dedicated to the experience of a single mother, women going through transitions, recovery, self-discovery. It wasn't an attempt to become famous or gain likes. It was a need to talk, share, perhaps become a beacon for someone, reminding them that you can get out of any darkness if you go step by step. I had a story, and finally it's time to tell it, not only for others, but also for myself, to perpetuate the path I've been on, starting with the night he flew to Vegas, and I was left holding my breath, holding back tears. The night was quiet, as if both the world and time had decided to give me this space to reboot. Tomorrow was supposed to be another busy day. Tommaso's visit to the kindergarten to get acquainted with Mimi's daily routine, final preparations for my going to work, shopping for necessary things at the office. But now I was no longer afraid of these tasks. 3 months ago, I was trembling at the thought of independence, like a person stepping on a shaky bridge for the first time. Now I felt solid ground under my feet, and I knew that even if the wind blew harder, I wouldn't fall. I took a sip of wine and began to write, line by line, addressing all the women who have ever been taught to be content with little, who are told that dreaming is a luxury, that asking is a weakness. My story was a response to these false lessons. It's been 6 months. I stood in front of the firm's largest client, presenting a digital marketing strategy honed to the smallest detail, with graphs, analytics, and conceptual moves, and I felt like my every cell was filled with focus and energy. I didn't just return to the profession, I blossomed in it. The phone in my pocket vibrated faintly, and just glancing at the screen, I noticed Tommaso's name flashing in the app. In a previous life, this message would have pulled me out of the present, bombarded me with worries. Now I finished my presentation with the same clarity I started with, and only then returned to the screen. Mimi has a fever. I picked her up from kindergarten early. I have it. I've already given you a baby antipyretic. The temperature is high, but he's sleeping. I thought you should know. I sank into a chair and closed my eyes for a minute, letting the emotions pass through me, worry, anxiety, but also surprise. Tommaso did it. He did everything the way we discussed, clearly, calmly, without drama, without me not knowing what to do. He just took responsibility, as a parent, as a partner in education. Is everything okay? Matteo asked, noticing my focused face. Mimi has a fever, I replied. Then go, he said firmly. We'll handle the rest. The trip to Tommaso's apartment took less time than usual. The city breathed evening slowness, and there were almost no traffic jams. When he opened the door, I was greeted by silence, not intense, but the kind that occurs in a house where a small child is sleeping. I looked into the living room and stopped for a moment. The room had changed, a playpen in the corner, toys laid out in boxes, a soft blanket on the couch, and, I couldn't believe my eyes, a photograph of Mimi in a wooden frame on the wall, taken during her first day in the garden. "She's still sleeping," Tommaso said, softly, almost in a whisper, leading me into the guest room, now converted into a nursery. The temperature dropped. Mimi was lying peacefully in a portable crib. Her cheeks were slightly pinkish, and her breathing was even. Next to her is her favorite rabbit horse, a toy that we thought was lost. "I found him in the car," Tommaso explained, catching my eye. "Apparently, it fell out of the diaper bag last time." We retreated into the living room, maintaining the respectful distance we had developed over the months, like two people who realize that boundaries do not interfere with intimacy if they are based on respect. "I called Dr. Morris," he said, referring to the pediatrician. "She said to watch, to call if the temperature rises. I keep a journal." He showed me the phone screen, temperature chart, medication time stamp, sleep notes. Not a performance, not ostentatious care, but real, quiet work. I nodded, feeling an unusual feeling spreading in my chest. Not trust, not yet, but respect. He was beginning to understand. And maybe one day, both of us, each in our own way, will come to a new level of understanding, not as husband and wife, but as the mom and dad of one amazing girl. I sat down, suddenly feeling everything in me shudder with the realization that this was not the same Tommaso sitting in front of me, who once flew to Las Vegas without blinking, leaving me alone with anxiety, loneliness, and incipient contractions at 38 weeks of pregnancy. To see the father, not just on a biological basis, but by choice, by actions, by the desire to be, to learn, to understand. "Thank you," I said softly but sincerely, letting those words carry everything I really felt at that moment. "You handled it very well." He shrugged his shoulders slightly, as if he wanted to dismiss the praise, but I saw how he straightened himself internally, as an almost imperceptible shadow of a smile appeared at the corners of his lips, a contentment that did not need loud speeches. "I'm trying," he said. "I pay attention, I take notes during visits, I read those parenting books that you recommended." And I really noticed it. In recent months, Tommaso has traveled a path that remains unbroken for many men, from a superficial attitude to fatherhood as a duty to genuine participation. He started asking questions, and not out of politeness, but because he wanted to know, when Mimi sleeps longer, what kind of porridge she choked on last time, which teddy friend she falls asleep with better. He began to remember, to ask, to be interested. He began to come to the pediatrician's appointments, listening attentively, as if every doctor's advice was a precious resource. Parenting classes helped, he admitted, looking at the floor. They made me realize how much I didn't know, how much I was missing just by being absent. Our conversation was interrupted by a soft, slightly sobbing cry from the nursery. We got up at the same time, but he immediately stepped back, giving me the opportunity to approach Mimi first. She woke up a little annoyed, but not in tears. The temperature, judging by her cheerful look, clearly continued to decrease. "Do you want me to make her a bottle?" Tommaso asked, looking into the room. "You probably have her favorite way of holding her when she's not feeling well." Something in me flinched at those words, not because he offered to help, but because he recognized my intuition, my knowledge, my experience as her mother. 6 months ago, he would not have even thought that our daughter might have a preference in how she is held. And now he knew. And this knowledge was not the result of a theoretical course, but of real engagement. I settled into a rocking chair, holding Mimi in my arms, and when he brought the bottle, it was at the perfect temperature, warm, but not scalding, just the way she liked it. "Sophia," he began cautiously, "I thought. I know that my period of supervised visits ends next week, but I would like to keep the current schedule for a while longer. I'm not sure I can handle it yet. I looked up at him with a mixture of surprise and respect. Do you want to continue supervised visits voluntarily? He nodded. I'm still learning. And your parents, they helped me more than I expected. They shared stories about you when you were little. That helped a lot. I'm not ready to go alone yet. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. That's what maturity looked like. This is what real growing up looked like, when you don't hide behind pride, but honestly say that you need a little more time. Okay, I said softly, we can do this. Later, when Mimi's temperature finally returned to normal, and I thanked Tommaso and returned home to the familiar space of our apartment, I was greeted by another message from him. Thank you for not abandoning me as a father. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but... I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. She deserves a father who tries. You're trying. That night, when Mimi was already asleep and I was sitting at my laptop, working on a new blog post, which by that time had gathered a small but active community of women sharing a similar path, I wrote about unexpected forms of healing, not only about my own, but also about what was happening when we leave room for change in others without sacrificing our boundaries. I wrote about how important it is to be able to distinguish between where forgiveness ends and self-respect begins, where compassion does not mean compromising one's own truth. My phone lit up with a new message from Matteo. The client really liked the presentation board. He wants to speed up the discussion on the launch of the campaign next week. I smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction and pride. I've come a long way, from the woman who once dimmed her own professional light so as not to overshadow her husband's ambitions, to the one who now confidently built her team, her vision, and her career. An increase would mean more responsibility, but also more flexibility, the ability to create a space where work and motherhood could coexist without constant guilt or choice. Mimi stirred in her crib, making sleepy noises, and I got up to check on her. I bent over her, touched her forehead. It was cool, calm, her breathing was even. There was a framed quote on her dresser that Francesca had given me for my birthday. She believed she could, so she did it. I read those words again and smiled. Because now I knew they were true. Looking at my sleeping daughter, I felt a deep sense of peace, as if the whole world stood still at that moment, giving us the opportunity to enjoy peace and quiet. Now we were writing our own story, in which strength did not mean ignoring people, but knowing how to let them earn their way back, in which forgiveness did not mean forgetting, but creating space for change, protecting our own hearts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always had, but tonight in our cozy apartment, with the stars twinkling outside the window, I knew with absolute certainty that we were exactly where we needed to be, not at the end, but in the middle of the beginning. A year has passed since I saw Tommaso packing for a trip to Vegas, since I gave birth alone, since I found the strength to start all over again. Mimi's first birthday party was in full swing at a local park, and I stepped back for a moment, admiring the scene in front of me. My daughter was sitting on her high chair, happily smashing a small cake made especially for her. Her dark curls bounced as she giggled, her eyes shining with joy. Our loved ones gathered around her, my parents, Francesca and her new husband Gabriel, our colleagues who had become friends, and yes, Tommaso and his parents too. She's got cake in her hair, Tommaso said, coming up to me with a clean washcloth at the ready. The easy way he anticipated her needs now still surprised me. Sometimes I let her enjoy it, I replied, smiling. That's what babying time is. The last year has been a path of transformation for both of us. Tommaso kept his word about extended supervised visits, gradually building his confidence as a father. He joined a support group for divorced fathers, started therapy, and even started volunteering at a local youth center. A man who once didn't bother to attend birth preparation classes was now teaching other fathers the importance of being present. My own changes were equally profound. I was promoted at work, and now I was leading a team of talented marketers. My blog has grown into a community with weekly support meetings for single mothers transitioning to independence. Last month, the publisher asked me to turn my story into a book. Do you remember last year when Francesca asked to join us with paper plates for an adult cake? If only someone had told you then that you would be here. Now I understood what she meant. Here we celebrated our daughter's first birthday together, politely, even warmly. Tommaso and I have found a way to be good parents without being husband and wife. It wasn't easy. There were still difficult days, disagreements about schedules or parenting decisions, but we learned to handle them with maturity and respect. It's speech time. My father called, tapping his spoon on the glass. I hadn't planned to speak, but looking at all these faces, the people who supported us, believed in us, helped us grow, the words came naturally. A year ago, I started lifting Mimi off her high chair and sitting her on my hip. I thought my world was falling apart. I'm alone, I'm afraid, and I'm going to become a mother in circumstances I never imagined. But what I thought was the end turned into the beginning. I glanced at Tommaso, who nodded encouragingly. We've come so far from those bitter days in the hospital. This past year has taught me that the power is not to never need help, but to know when to ask for it. That forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about not letting it control your future. And most importantly, love, true love, sometimes means letting go of what you thought you wanted in order to make room for what you really need. At that moment, when I was holding Mimi in my arms, feeling her warm breath on my cheek, I realized that our story was just beginning. Mimi reached out to me, her tiny palm, sticky with icing and fun, gently patted my cheek, leaving a sweet, pink-white imprint on my skin. Laughter burst from everyone standing nearby, infectious and warm, like the sun itself, gently gliding along the slopes of the park. I hugged her tighter, not caring that her cake would now smear on my dress. Let it, because it was the perfect moment, full of happiness and simplicity. I looked up and continued my speech, which I started without planning, but which I now led from the heart, to my daughter, who taught me more about courage in her first year of life than I had ever learned in all my previous years, to our families, who showed what unconditional support means, and to new beginnings, wherever they lead. Later, when the evening stretched into a golden haze and the guests began to slowly disperse, and Mimi dozed off, snuggled in her stroller, Matteo came up to me, holding a small gift bag in his hands. "It's from the team," he said, smiling. "I know you helped choose, but they still hit something." Inside was a thick, expensive leather diary with my name and quote engraved on the cover. She built to love life, from the very beginning to the very top. I ran my fingers over the letters, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Not because of the material, not because of the beauty of the product, but because of the recognition. People have seen my story. And they appreciated her. The publisher, as Matteo later mentioned, was in touch again. They were seriously interested in publishing a book based on my blog, in which I talked about recovery, about the path through motherhood, loneliness, and a professional renaissance. I looked around the park, the one where my daughter had just celebrated her first year. The evening sun cast long shadows on the grass, but unlike the shadows of the past, these were soft, almost blissful. They did not frighten, but reminded us of how far we had come. Tommaso was putting presents in the trunk of his car, and he had a regular weekend with Mimi scheduled for tomorrow. He really rebuilt his spare room, turning it into a full-fledged nursery with painted walls on which a fabulous fresco bloomed. He painted it himself, step by step, with patience, which I would not have expected from him a year ago. My phone vibrated, a message from Dr. Longo, our old mediator. She wrote that she had seen my latest publication and invited me to speak at an upcoming seminar on co-parenting. I'm having dinner with Francesca sometime next week, and as usual, David from accounting will be asking questions about me. I smiled, putting my phone back in my pocket. I'll have time to think about everything later. Now, at this moment, I just wanted to be here, in the present, to keep it in my memory until the last smell, until the last ray. I walked over to the stroller where Mimi was sleeping peacefully. Her tiny hand was hugging the stuffed rabbit's ear, and her chest was rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I bent down and kissed her on the forehead. "Happy birthday, my brave girl," I whispered. "Thank you for helping me regain my strength." The sun was setting, turning the sky shades of pink, gold, and light lilac, and as we drove home, with soft music playing in the car, I thought about a year ago. About the woman who stood in the bedroom doorway and watched her husband pack his things for Vegas, the woman who held her stomach and tried not to cry. Back then, she believed she was losing everything. I would like to tell her that everything will not just be fine, everything will be fine. That she's stronger than she looks. That she would be loved, above all, by herself. That she deserves not lies, compromises, or empty promises, but sincerity, respect, and gentleness. But maybe deep down she already knew that. She just needed someone to remind her. And that someone became our daughter. Late at night, when I had put Mimi to bed and was sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea in my hands, I opened my laptop. The blinking cursor was waiting for the course. I opened the new blog entry and started typing. To a woman who reads this and isn't sure if she can start all over again, you can. To a mother who wonders if she's strong enough, you're strong. To everyone who has ever felt lonely in the darkest moment, your light is on its way. Trust me. I know. Outside, the stars twinkled in the dark blue sky. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new meetings, new challenges. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't wonder if I could stand it. I knew it. I was ready for anything. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.